Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marietje Schaake. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Dutch Democratic Party, D66, and we're part of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Here in the European Parliament, I serve on the Foreign Affairs and the International Trade Committees, as well as on the Committee on Culture, Media, Education, Youth and Sports. And I'm very sorry I cannot join you today for the Roundtable, but I'm grateful for the Global Diplomatic Forum to give me the opportunity to share some thoughts on very recent and urgent developments via this video message. Let me start by focusing on the unfolding situation in Egypt, as I think its future will also have a big impact on the EU's policies towards the Middle East peace process, making an end to the ongoing civil war in Syria and our approach towards Iran. President Morsi's constitutional declaration was well-timed, interestingly timed, after he received almost unanimous praise from both the US and the EU for his role in brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the recent Gaza war. The success of this Gaza ceasefire marked Egypt's re-emergence as an independent regional player, and it also revealed the impact or the intentions that it will have on the balance of power between Israel and Palestine. The question is whether Egypt will act as a completely independent nation or whether it will seek further cooperation with both the US and the EU or either of them, as well as regional allies, or to be organized as a leader in the League of Arab States. The constitutional declarations do not bode well for the future of the Egyptian people and the stability in the country. During the Gaza crisis, the first ever EU-Egypt task force took place in Egypt. And from the EU side, the delegation consisted of almost 600 participants, including many business people and representatives focusing on investment opportunities. A meeting between President Morsi and NGO representatives was cancelled at the last moment. EU High Representative Catherine Ashton praised the developments in Egypt and looked forward to closer cooperation, economically and politically, between the EU and Egypt. She backed up that intention with a commitment of almost 5 billion euros in financial support and assistance to the Egyptian authorities, and by referring to the so-called concept that is labeled more for more, making the EU aid conditional on respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, good governance, the rule of law, as well as economic reforms. And then came President Morsi's declaration, granting himself, his laws, and the Constitutional Council judicial immunity and unlimited powers to save the Egyptian revolution, contrary to basically all conditions set out by the EU through Catherine Ashton in her concluding remarks at a press conference. Now, if the EU wants to retain its credibility as a strong actor vis-à-vis Egypt, but also in the wider North Africa and Middle East, it now has to back up its words with actions. On November 23rd, I've called on Catherine Ashton, the High Representative, to actually freeze the financial support to the Egyptian government until a true democratic reform has been established, and to ensure that the executive is actually under the law and also subject to judicial oversight again, and that the rights and the freedoms of the Egyptian people are respected and protected by the Constitution and by checks and balances through the rule of law. Checks and balances cannot just come from the streets. I believe the EU cannot stand by and conduct its foreign policy through statements. It will not have an impact if we simply live in a paper reality. Actions are needed to follow through. If we cannot agree on a common foreign policy on all issues, at least we should stick to the policies that we have already agreed on. And one of them is this more for more principle. To use our economic leverage and market access as a strategic foreign policy tool to focus and demand reforms, human rights, the rule of law and democratic reforms. This credibility issue, conditionality issue, is also a factor in the EU's role vis-à-vis the Middle East peace process. While we're still fully committed to a two-state solution, the EU might have to toughen our stance towards Israel for continuously ignoring basic international law through, for example, the recent expansion of settlements once more. This doesn't only play out politically, but also, for example, through trade relations that the EU has with Israel. We signed an association agreement with Israel that has entered into force in the year 2000, and it has a clear conditionality clause built in to this agreement that requires respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and international law. And this weekend's announcement by the Israeli government to freeze the Palestinian tax income, as well as preparations of yet again a new set of houses that would be constructed, I believe the EU has to start to have a look at this clause. If we want to keep the two-state solution as a viable opportunity and a real goal, we cannot let things go by day as they do today. In a globally changing world where multilateral fora are losing their importance in international relations, the EU has to learn to show its teeth instead of just using words. The crisis in Syria also shows us that depending on internationally agreed solutions and mandates is becoming more and more difficult as time passes by. Russia and China, both with different reasons and stakes, form a de facto obstructionist coalition, keeping the international community, through the United Nations, hostage. We do have to abide by international rules, laws and principles, but it's creating a paralysis while people are dying. The EU needs to become a more assertive and action-focused regional player that seeks ad hoc coalitions with countries in our neighborhood, for example Turkey, as well as the Arab League and other nations that we can agree with. The ongoing humanitarian relief efforts and the sheltering of the influx of refugees from Syria is something we should work on urgently. The successful intervention in Libya under the responsibility to protect mandate is another example of how we can do that. Diplomatically, the European Union has the lead in the negotiations with Iran to end the nuclear program. But it is the US that now has the de facto upper hand in leading international efforts through forging a broad coalition through strong sanctions, which have, again, an impact on the EU's foreign policy. And that brings me to my last point. While working together, the EU has to retain its independence. Only when we are independent, in that capacity, we can remain a valuable and credible interlocutor vis-à-vis the most difficult political challenges and conflicts of our time. The European Union has a long history and a lot of experience in overcoming internal divides, in guiding transitions towards more democracy. We should share our difficult history and to do so in a way that offers both a perspective for the future as well as an insight into the lessons of how difficult the path of transition and unification has been. I wish you all a fruitful discussion, and I would like to continue the conversation that I cannot attend in person via email or online. Thank you very much.